get a craving for an early morning plate of eggs and some great coffee? I mean, a really early morning craving, say 12:15 a.m.? Well, if you were at La Parroquia in Veracruz, you wouldn't be alone. I've waited for a table at this place at midnight on a Thursday. Maybe it's just because no matter what day, no matter what time, people get a real craving for a good cup of coffee. Gracias. But you know, as much as people are looking for a good plate of huevos rancheros and a good café con leche, I think they're really looking for a place to socialize. Just look at this place. It's a scene. The kind of place you might head after you've been cruising the paseo with some of your compadres. Mexican graffiti. As much as they're coming here for the food, I think that they're looking for a whole lot more. But the food? Well, you know, when you find a place that's open all hours, chances are the breakfast menu will be open as well. I, like a lot of other people, find great egg dishes very comforting. And who's to say when you need a little bit of comfort? But who's to say that egg dishes are just for breakfast anyway? But for that matter, whoever said that cornflakes were for breakfast or orange juice? I mean, just think about it. Flakes of grain covered with the milk of a cow and served with the juice of an orange? Why, that must sound as strange to people all over the world as, well, say, a breakfast of beans and tortillas and chilies might to a kid in Battle Creek, Michigan. But tortillas and beans and chilies is the way that generations of Mexicans have started their day. Now, Mexicans love eggs, but it actually wasn't until recently that they added eggs to the breakfast mix. That apparently was an idea that sort of filtered down from the give and take that Mexico's had with the United States for many years. And the result, well, it's probably on your local diner's menu. It's those wonderful ranch-style eggs, the huevos rancheros. Eggs are really very simple, but the key is what you're going to mix with them. And in Mexico, that usually means the sauce or the salsa. For huevos rancheros, it means a tomato sauce. Now, a lot of recipes will start by asking you to open a can of tomatoes and putting them in the blender. But if you can find some great, fresh, ripe tomatoes, I suggest that you roast them like I have these. Roasted them under a broiler about 4 inches away for about 6 minutes per side until they're blackened and blistered. You see how the skins have opened up there? And when they're completely soft, you take them out and you let them cool down and then peel off the skins. It'll just come right off of them. They should be soft all the way through. Now, the same thing is true about some green chilies. You could use serranos or jalapenos. I'm going to use jalapenos today, but I've roasted those, this time in a dry skillet, not under the broiler, and it takes about 15 minutes just turning them until they're completely soft. You see they'll darken in spots. Cool those off and then take off the little stem end of them. Peel that, pull that right off. And then I'm just going to tear them up and put them into a food processor. This will help them to chop more evenly. Now the tomatoes are going to go right in with those, and then I'm going to make a kind of coarse puree. Now we don't want too fine a puree when we're making this rustic ranch-style sauce, so I didn't make that go too long. And then we're just going to put it right in with our onions that have been sauteed until nicely brown, and I'm going to stir it until the whole thing is reduced and thick. About 4 or 5 minutes. And then once it's cooked down, add some broth, and we'll let that simmer for about 15 minutes until it thickens slightly. Now just a sprinkling of salt in our simmered sauce to season it. And while that was simmering, I fried some eggs sunny side up. Don't cook them over too high a heat. I always like to do them in a non-stick skillet that's filled with a little bit of oil. Cook them slow and gentle, and they won't get tough and all blistered looking. Now, on huevos rancheros, a little garnish is a nice touch. It'll kind of make them taste sprightly. I've got a little chopped cilantro here and some of that Mexican queso añejo. This is a garnishing cheese, and you can see that it just crumbles beautifully into your hand very easily. Think of it as sort of like a Romano or a Parmesan cheese. Some onion rings, and then of course, all huevos rancheros come on a base of tortillas. Usually it's yesterday's tortillas left over, and they're softened by quick frying them in a hot skillet with a little bit of oil. That makes them a little heavy for me, so I like to steam heat the tortillas. You could do that in a vegetable steamer, a regular vegetable steamer, with them wrapped in a towel. Let the water come to a boil and let it boil for about a minute, and then just let them sit off the heat for another 10 or 15 minutes. Well, they kind of reconstitute. You could also use one of my favorite apparatuses. That's a rice cooker. This one came with a vegetable steaming basket, and I steamed the tortillas right in that. Take a couple of those and put those down into the base of my plate here. And then I'm going to slide on a couple of those sunny side up fried eggs. Kind of hot there. Now, on top of that goes the sauce. This is, of course, the crowning glory of great huevos rancheros. Just spoon on some of that sauce, leaving the yolks uncovered. My mouth is beginning to water. Looks just delicious. And our little garnishes here. We've got some chopped cilantro to sprinkle over the whole thing. A little Mexican queso añejo. A few onion rings and a quick wipe of the plate. And there it goes. Well, nothing against a quick bowl of cornflakes, but when you've got a few minutes, boy, huevos rancheros can be a real eye-opener, no matter what time of day it is. The egg, all by itself, is a study in natural, simple perfection. It's pure poetry, really. And if you want to get technical about it, you could say that the egg delivers high-quality protein and practically every vitamin and mineral needed by humans. Add to that the fact that you can cook an egg in minutes. Now, just imagine if somebody had invented and marketed the egg. Why, they'd call it revolutionary, a wonder food. And no doubt we'd be paying more than just a couple bucks a dozen for them. But fortunately, nature rules in this case, and the egg remains an inexpensive source of nutrition around the whole world. Now, in Mexico, you find eggs everywhere. They're scrambled and served on plates, or wrapped into soft corn tortillas for tacos, or into split crusty buns for tortas. When I go to a comida corrida in an inexpensive little restaurant, they always ask me, do I want a fried egg along with the rice course? At the juice bars, you can get an egg blended into the smoothies, and well, down in Oaxaca, they make omelets and serve them in a kind of brothy, epazote-flecked tomato sauce and call it huevos a la oaxaqueña. In the Yucatan, they bake eggs with shrimp and oysters, huevos a la malagueña. Or they make that kind of crazy layering of beans and tostada, fried eggs, tomato sauce, ham, peas, cheese, huevos motuleños. One time, my wife Deanne and I were visiting a graduate school friend who was doing linguistics work in a remote village in the Mixtec-speaking area of Guerrero. And I mean remote, like a 4-hour walk beyond the end of the bus line. Well, she wanted to take us out to visit some of her friends, her neighbors there. And, well, at the heart of what it means to be Mexican is the sense of generous hospitality. So the neighbors that we went to visit, they wanted to offer us something, but the only thing that they had in this humble little house was one egg. Well, you know how some meals can just be incredibly exquisite, other ones can thrill with innovation? Well, that meal, that generous offering of one perfectly fresh scrambled egg divided between 3 people was one of the most memorable meals of my life. But you know, a lot of people take home another kind of memory of Mexico. You say the words Mexican breakfast and why, their eyes just light up. You can almost smell the pungent aroma of just picked flowers and ripe tropical fruit. Well, what they're thinking about is that sumptuous spread that's been laid out by their vacation hotel. Anything but a simple bite. Now, when I'm looking for a leisurely weekend breakfast with my family in Mexico, well, I always go for the regional specialties. We're at the beautiful Camino Real Hotel in Oaxaca. So my choice this morning is huevos a la oaxaqueña, the Oaxacan-style eggs. It's a kind of omelet with a brothy, spicy tomato sauce and a piece of seared local fresh cheese, some beans and guacamole on there. Now that all might sound sort of savory compared to what we eat for breakfast in the United States. And what Deanne's chosen even goes further in that direction. This is chilaquiles. It's a savory tortilla casserole with a spicy tomato sauce, and then a little piece of seared tasajo. That's a half-cured, half-dried beef that they sear on a hot griddle here. Lainey likes the simpler things, a simple ham omelet and some hash browns. Of course, we've got beautiful fresh fruit on the table and orange and grapefruit juice, but did you ever think about celery juice with a little bit of cilantro and parsley in it? Now that's a pretty savory option. Now, if you say weekend breakfast to a lot of folks here in Mexico, what pops to their mind right away is menudo, tripe soup. Now, I know it's hard for a lot of Americans to stomach the idea of tripe, but I think it's actually very delicious, and it's reportedly a great hangover cure here in Mexico, which is probably one of the reasons it's so associated with weekend breakfasts. But for me right now, I think I'm going to dig into my huevos a la oaxaqueña. Remember what I was telling you about orange juice, about how orange juice for breakfast was really the result of some clever marketing? Well, that campaign proved to be so successful that a few years later they launched another one. Remember that old slogan, orange juice, it's not just for breakfast anymore? Well, that may be true, but the first tradition that they created proved pretty hard to break. But here in Mexico City, on a busy street, it's not just about breakfast. It's not just about orange juice. It's about fruit. And with all of this luscious tropical fruit literally hanging around, it's not hard to be convinced that a glass of juice might just be the perfect refreshment at any time of day. I mean, just look at this pineapple. It's the field-ripened kind, or papaya, red papaya, or my very favorite fruit in the whole Mexican marketplace, the absolutely incredibly aromatic guava. What they call guayaba here. They squeeze this stuff, or they blend it with water to make what they call aguas, and they serve it from morning to night. And since they prepare it right in front of you, just think about all the vitamin C. So, what's your idea about breakfast? Just a simple piece of toast and a glass of juice? Maybe it's a big plate of eggs and bacon. Maybe it's a meal to skip altogether. Well, things change all the time. They certainly have changed here in Mexico. But in the past, the tradition has been to have 2 breakfasts. Now, the first one, it's called desayuno, and that translates directly as breakfast. And you can see how it sort of fits into the agrarian society of years gone by, but it was just a little something to kind of get you going. It's usually consisted of some sweet, light breads, a glass of juice, and then a cup of hot chocolate or some coffee.
Then sort of mid-morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock or so, there's a second breakfast. This is where you really, after working hard in the fields in the morning, you get your sustenance. It's called almuerzo. Now, how do you translate that? I don't really know, but it's the stuff that is inspiring all of those great dishes on the hotel breakfast. Things like the savory huevos dishes, the huevos rancheros and huevos a la oaxaqueña, or the chilaquiles, tortilla casserole. But some people will just slip out into the street if they're office workers and grab a quick taco. Now, they need that because the main meal of the day doesn't really come at noon. It comes about, say, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a sort of formal meal with a run of courses that usually goes from a brothy soup to a rice course with some vegetables in it, and then a nice full-flavored stew, and then after that a very simple dessert, something like poached fruit or a simple custard. Now, the last meal of the day is called cena. And you can imagine that if you've eaten late in the afternoon and you've had such a big repast that you're not going to be very hungry. So you might just go out with some friends, wander in the street, grab a taco or an ear of grilled corn. Or if you're at home, well, you might just scramble an egg or two and enjoy that. And just to scramble things up a little bit more, I'm going to make some serious comfort food, breakfast in bed for dinner. It doesn't even matter that I've got 2 people here with slightly different flavors on their mind. I mean, I'm in the mood to make some huevos revueltos a la mexicana. That's eggs scrambled with tomatoes and onions and green chili. And, well, at the end, she wants scrambled eggs with some mushrooms and tomatillo. It's sort of just a matter of one shared craving and 2 different salsas. Now, mine has to start with a classic salsa mexicana. That's where huevos a la mexicana get their name. It's the classic chopped tomato salsa. And the tomatoes for it, well, they need to be really ripe. I'm ready to start the salsa, mixing it together. You don't really even need a recipe for this. Just make it with proportions to suit your own taste. And onion, white onion, I'm going to scoop into a little strainer and then rinse it under cold running water before I add it to the tomatoes. I do that to take that sort of onion bite out of it. Shake off the excess liquid and then put that right in with the tomatoes. Next ingredient in our red, white, and green here is chopped green chilies. These are serrano chili. And for a rustic salsa like this, I just chop them, seeds and all. Now that's gonna go right into the bowl, along with a little bit of chopped raw garlic. Stir that up, and I've got the basics for salsa mexicana. Now, the next salsa we're gonna make is a salsa verde. You know, it's got that wonderful contour of green spiciness and herbs and zest. I mean, what it really comes down to is the difference between a tomato and a tomatillo. Now, everybody that has a garden wants to grow tomatoes, right? But why not the second cousin, the tomatillo? I mean, like most of the tomatoes, it's a pretty viney plant. That's why we've kept the tomatillo plant up in a cage here. It requires similar conditions. It likes sort of moderately rich, loose soil, a moderate amount of water, and full sunlight. And it also offers a world of possibilities in the kitchen. You know, it's also native to here. Yeah, right here in the Midwest. You know, once when my daughter was little, I was reading Little House on the Prairie to her, and right there was this description of a wild fruit that they collected to make jam out of. It was a little papery, husked orb with a purple blush to it. Now, you might think of the tomatillo as all green, but in the wild, they grow viney with this beautiful purple color. Now, my favorite
tomatillo salsa starts with roasted, not boiled tomatillos. It's real easy to do that. Just put them into a baking sheet, slide them about 4 inches below a preheated broiler, let them roast for about 5 minutes, then flip them over and roast the other sides. They're going to be all browned and completely soft all the way through. Same goes for some garlic and green chilies. These are the Serrano chilies, and those are done in a dry skillet over medium heat for about 10 or 15 minutes, turning them. They'll also get little dark spots on them and be completely soft. Combine everything in a food processor, put the lid on, and then make a kind of coarse puree. Now into that salsa, I'm going to put a little bit of rinsed white onion, and we're on to the mushrooms that go into this dish. I went to the farmer's market and I found these wonderful cultivated oyster mushrooms. They're so tender you can use the stem and all. So into a skillet, I've got this already set over medium heat. I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil and put a big handful of those mushrooms. Those will just cook there until they're wilted, about 3 or 4 minutes. Now on top of those mushrooms, I'm going to pour a little bit of the green salsa. And in the other skillet, also filmed with a little bit of oil, goes a little bit of the chopped tomato salsa. I'm going to stir those two around until they're reduced and concentrated. Okay, these are just at the right stage now, and it's on to the eggs. I've got my eggs beaten here already. But I'm going to add just a little bit of cream. You could use sour cream, yogurt, even water for this, or milk. A spoonful of salt to give them seasonings. Remember, we haven't seasoned anything to this point. And when that gets it in, by the way, that milk or cream or whatever you add to it's going to add lightness to the eggs. We'll pour a little bit into each of the skillets here. And to the huevos a la mexicana, I'm going to add some diced avocado. Sprinkle that over the top, a little chopped cilantro to both of these skillets. And then I'm just going to let them scramble, stirring them up regularly until they're just perfectly set. A little huevos revueltos a la mexicana for me. And for Deanne, some eggs scrambled with oyster mushrooms and tomatillo. A little garnish of fresh cilantro on top of each one. Dress them up. And what's for dessert? Well, how about a little breakfast at Tiffany's? The way I see it, sometimes life is like an all-night restaurant. You just gotta stay open to everything.